Hey everyone, in this series of videos, we've been seeing how the Gospels often slip in little subtle details about the historical setting without making a big fuss about them. These details can be backed up by sources outside of the Bible. My goal here is to build a strong case that the Gospel authors knew their stuff and were consistently truthful. Be sure to go back and check out the playlist for more details. By checking out non-Christian sources like Josephus, we see how the Bible's stories fit into ancient history. And today we're particularly looking at the stories of John the Baptist. So for starters, Mark and Matthew's gospel tell us why Herod chucked John the Baptist into prison. It all boiled down to Herod marrying his brother Philip's wife, Herodias, and John calling him out on it. Pretty straightforward, right? But hold on, because Josephus tells us a different story. According to him, Herod was more worried about John's growing influence over the people, fearing that it might lead to a full-on rebellion. So Herod figured that it was safer to kill off John before things got really messy. Now, as I said, the Gospels paint a different picture. They say that it wasn't Herod's paranoia or fear of an uprising that landed John in the slammer. It was his disapproval of Herod's marriage shenanigans. But hey, why couldn't it be a mix of both, right? You could imagine Herod sweating bullets over potential unrest, while also feeling the heat from John's moral high ground. Josephus tells us that Herod Antipas had this whole love triangle thing going on. First off, he's married to Phasaelis, the daughter of King Aretas IV, king of the Nabataeans. But then Herod goes off to Rome, where he meets his brother Herod Philip. Yes, confusing, I know, there's a lot of Herods going on, who's married to this other lady named Herodias, who's actually Herod's niece. And Herod Antipas, smooth talker that he is, decides that he wants to marry his brother's wife, Herodias. So they cook up this plan where Herod will divorce Phasaelis and marry Herodias once he gets back from Rome. But plot twist, Phasaelis catches wind of the whole scheme and hightails it to her dad Aretas, spilling all the tea about Herod's whole plan. And you know what? Aretas, he was not thrilled about it at all. He's already got beef with Herod over some land disputes, and now this, he decides that it is on. Josephus tells us that both sides start gathering troops, and when the whole showdown happens, Herod's army gets wiped out thanks to some sneaky betrayal by some folks from Philip's turf who joined Aretas' squad. Herod, not one to take a loss lightly, writes a letter to the emperor Tiberius complaining about Aretas' antics. And you know what Tiberius does? He tells his guy in charge of Syria, Vitellius, to go kick some serious Nabataean butt. So check this out. According to Josephus, Herod Antipas took a big L in his war against Aretas IV. Now, here's where it gets interesting. A bunch of Jews were like, hey, maybe this defeat is kind of some sowing and reaping for how Herod treated John the Baptist. They thought Herod got what was coming to him because he offed John, who they saw as a stand-up guy preaching about righteousness and telling folks to get baptized. Now, this lines up with what the Gospels say about why Herod locked up John in the first place. The man would not shut up about Herod's shady marriage to his brother's wife, Herodias. Herodias naturally wasn't too pleased about John's criticism and wanted him gone for good. So here's the connection. Herod's messed up relationship with Herodias not only led to John's imprisonment and execution, but also sparked the whole war with Aretas IV, which ended with Herod licking his wounds. It's no wonder the Jews were pointing fingers at Herod for his army's defeat. This whole web of events, where John's criticism indirectly led to Herod's downfall, is like a puzzle where all the pieces just fit together. Alright, so let's dive into Mark 6 where things take a dark turn with John the Baptist. So Herodias' daughter pulls this move at a banquet. She dances up a storm, and then Herod's like, name your price, kiddo. And what does she ask for? John's head on a platter straight up. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Mark uses his Greek word speculator for the guy who Herod sends off to do the dirty work. Now, that is not your typical word for a civil executioner. It's actually a military rank, kind of like a scout or messenger or even a bodyguard for the big shots in Rome. These guys were not usually in charge of the business of beheadings. And get this, Josephus backs up Mark's story, saying John was killed at Machaerus, Herod's military fortress. So it makes total sense that Herod would send a military officer to get the job done, especially if he's out in the field dealing with his ex-father-in-law's drama. All of this is like putting together pieces of a puzzle. Mark's detail about the military guy matches up with Josephus's account, giving us a clearer picture of what all went down. So yeah, it's another breadcrumb leading us to the conclusion that there's some real history behind the gospel stories. But wait, because there's even more. In Mark chapter 10, Jesus gets grilled by the Pharisees about divorce, and he's dropping some truth bombs. But there's this part at the end that's raised some eyebrows by the critics. See, Jesus says that if a man divorces his wife and hops into another marriage, he's committing adultery, and the same goes if a woman does the same thing. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. Jewish law allowed for men to divorce their wives, but there really wasn't a provision for women to do the same. So, biblical critics have wondered if Mark kind of goofed here. Maybe he just didn't know Jewish law too well. But Josephus, the historian, drops a bombshell that sheds light on all this. Remember Herod Antipas, the big shot up in Galilee, was knee-deep in that whole scandal of marrying his brother's wife. And get this was right in the very place where Jesus was preaching. Jesus' words about divorce would have hit close to home for the folks in Galilee. Jesus wasn't messing around. He was calling out Herod just like his cousin John did. So when you connect all the dots, it's like these historical breadcrumbs back up Mark's story, slotting everything neatly into the timeline and location where Jesus was preaching. But there's even more. John the Baptist's scene by the Jordan River is pretty interesting. In Luke 3:10-14, some folks ask John the Baptist what they should do to improve their lives. Verse 14 tells us about a group of soldiers asking him for advice, and he basically tells them not to bully people, threaten them for money, or use false accusations, and to just be cool with their wages. The word for soldiers in this verse is a specific Greek term that literally means those who are soldiering or those who are actively being soldiers. This is the only time this form appears in the Gospels and Acts out of a total of 29 uses of the word for soldier. The present participle in Luke 3:14 shows us that these soldiers were on active duty. But wait, why were there soldiers on active duty? Wasn't this a peaceful time, close to the start of Pilate's decade-long rule? But remember, there was military action happening. It was in the conflict between Herod Antipas and Aretas IV, the Nabataean king. Antipas had a fortress that we've already mentioned called Machaerus, and it turns out that it was 15 miles southeast of the Jordan River's mouth on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, close to the borders of Aretas and Herod's territories. Antipas had actually hired a mercenary army for his war against Aretas, so these soldiers were likely on their way to beef up the garrison at Machaerus. This means they would naturally pass by where John the Baptist was baptizing while they were heading to reinforce the garrison at Machaerus. This little detail is a subtle touch that supports the credibility of Luke's account. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Make sure to catch up on the rest of the playlist where we dive into how history outside of the Bible lines up with it. And hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more historical nuggets. Thanks so much for watching.